Imagine for a moment that everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle, the Hollywood starlet, the royal bride, the global humanitarian, is only part of the story. Imagine discovering that the carefully curated image presented to the world, the one that earned her fame, admiration, and ultimately a place in the House of Windsor, is hiding a secret so profound, so explosive, that it could rewrite the narrative of her entire life. What if I told you that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has been keeping a child hidden from the world for over 21 years, a daughter she had before ever meeting Prince Harry? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It sounds like something out of a soap opera, doesn't it? And yet, every whisper, every hint, every half-forgotten story from her past starts to point in the same shocking direction. A secret so carefully guarded that very few people in her orbit even knew it existed. And tonight, we are going to pull back the curtain. We are going to examine the truth behind the speculation, the confessions, the hidden evidence, and the ripple effects of a revelation that could rock not only Meghan Markle's personal life, but the very perception of the modern royal family. Now, before we dive deeper, I want you to picture Meghan in her early 20s. A young woman full of ambition, a rising star in Hollywood, charming, intelligent, and poised for a life that seemed destined for success. The cameras loved her, the roles loved her, and somewhere in this whirlwind of ambition and glamour, she met a man by the name of Joe Giuliano. Joe Giuliano was not a royal. He was not a Hollywood superstar, but in many ways, he was her world at the time. He was her boyfriend, her confidant, her almost fiancé. He was the man who might have been the father of a life she carried in secrecy. What happened next is where the story takes a dark, dramatic turn. There are whispers of a relationship that ended abruptly, of a pregnancy that was hidden from the public eye, and of a child whose very existence was erased from the narrative of Meghan's life. For decades, the world has been focused on Meghan's rise, from her Hollywood beginnings to her fairy tale marriage to Prince Harry, but very little attention has been paid to the private life she meticulously guarded. And yet, the pieces were always there, scattered in whispers, in interviews, in fleeting photos, and in subtle hints that only now, in hindsight, make chilling sense. The magnitude of this revelation cannot be overstated. Imagine being 21 years old and discovering that your mother, the woman who everyone calls a princess, kept you hidden from the public eye. Imagine seeing her step into a world of power, prestige, and influence while your own existence remained a secret, locked away from every headline, every public appearance, every royal function. That is the reality that allegedly unfolded with Meghan's daughter, a young woman who for over 2 decades lived in the shadows, unrecognized, unknown, and unseen by a world that worshipped her mother. But let's back up a moment. How do we know any of this? What evidence exists to suggest that Meghan Markle had a child prior to meeting Prince Harry? And more importantly, why has this story remained in the shadows for so long? The answer lies in a combination of public records, interviews, leaked statements, and the meticulous investigative work of journalists and insiders who have spent years piecing together the fragmented puzzle of Meghan's life. Sources indicate that Meghan's relationship with Joe Giuliano was serious, more serious than most people realize. There were talks of marriage, discussions about the future, and plans that were tragically altered by circumstances no one fully understands. Some claim that during this relationship, Meghan became pregnant, and in a decision that would haunt her for years, she chose to keep the pregnancy hidden. Legal documents, rumors from former acquaintances, and subtle photographic evidence all point toward the existence of a daughter born in the early 2000s, before Meghan's meteoric rise in Hollywood and her eventual entry into the British royal family. Consider the implications of this secret. Not only does it rewrite the narrative of Meghan Markle's early life, but it also introduces a new player into the story, one whose existence could challenge perceptions, ignite scandals, and even provoke legal scrutiny. Royals are known for their secrets. Hollywood thrives on secrets. But a child? That is a revelation that cuts deeper, touching on issues of trust, betrayal, identity, and the very nature of family. How do you reconcile the image of the poised, composed, globally admired Duchess with the reality of a hidden daughter? How do you explain the emotional and psychological toll such a secret might impose, not just on Meghan, but on the child herself. And yet, despite the gravity of these revelations, the world remained largely unaware. Meghan's public life continued unabated. She captured headlines with every appearance, every speech, every charity event. She navigated the complexities of royal life with grace, charm, and precision. Prince Harry, in love and completely devoted, stood by her side. But behind the cameras, behind closed doors, a story simmered. A story of secrecy, silence, and hidden truths waiting for the right moment to surface. Which brings us to the present day. After years of speculation, subtle hints, and investigative digging, Meghan Markle has allegedly finally admitted the truth. The daughter who was hidden from the world, the one who lived in the shadows, is real. The whispers are confirmed, and the implications are staggering. Not only does this revelation affect Meghan and her immediate family, but it also has the potential to reverberate across the royal family, the media, and the global public who have followed Meghan's story for decades. Imagine the media storm. Imagine the social media frenzy. Imagine the tabloids scrambling to connect the dots, uncover the documents, and interview sources who have remained silent for years. This is not just another celebrity revelation. This is a story that touches on themes of secrecy, betrayal, identity, and the often hidden truths behind public personas. It is a story that challenges our assumptions, confronts our expectations, and forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle. And yet, even as we approach the heart of this story, questions remain. How did Meghan manage to keep such a profound secret for so long? What does this mean for her relationship with Prince Harry, with the royal family, and with the world at large? And most importantly, who is this daughter, and what does she think about her mother, her past, and the life that was hidden from her for over 2 decades? As we unfold this story, we will explore every angle, every revelation, and every emotional beat. We will examine Meghan's early life, her relationship with Joe Giuliano, the alleged pregnancy, and the daughter whose existence has remained a mystery for 21 years. We will look at the confessions, the documents, the photographs, and the subtle clues that, when pieced together, form a narrative that is both shocking and deeply human. This is a story of ambition and secrecy, of love and betrayal, of power and consequence. It is a story that forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about public personas and private realities, about the cost of secrets, and about the truth that can no longer be contained. Meghan Markle's life, as we have known it, is about to be re-examined under a new light. And what comes next may very well change the course of her story and the lives of those closest to her, forever. What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle's life before the royal wedding was a carefully constructed illusion? What if the sparkling red carpet appearances, the magazine covers, and the girl next door persona were just the tip of an iceberg hiding secrets so profound that they could rewrite history? That is exactly where our story begins. Because behind the glamour, the ambition, and the poised smiles, there was a life that few truly understood. A life that would later produce a revelation so shocking it left the world questioning everything about Meghan Markle. Before the wedding, before the global headlines, Meghan Markle was just a young woman trying to navigate Hollywood. She was ambitious, intelligent, and determined. But she was also incredibly private, a trait that would later serve as a double-edged sword. Sources say that Meghan was not just another struggling actress. She was methodical, calculating, and aware of how perception could shape reality. She had a vision for her life, and she pursued it relentlessly. But in the midst of chasing her dreams, there was a chapter of her story that remained hidden, a chapter involving a young man named Joe Giuliano, a man who, according to insiders, played a pivotal role in her early adult life. Joe Giuliano was not a Hollywood superstar. He wasn't a famous producer, director, or high-profile executive. But to Meghan, he was significant. He was reportedly charming, attentive, and deeply involved in her life during her early 20s. Friends from that era described the relationship as intense and, at times, tumultuous. They weren't just dating. They were making plans, talking about the future, and possibly imagining a life together beyond Hollywood's bright lights. And yet, beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary relationship, extraordinary events were quietly unfolding. Events that Meghan would later go to great lengths to keep secret. It is said that during this relationship, Meghan became pregnant. Imagine being a young woman in your early 20s, in the midst of a burgeoning career, facing the reality that you're carrying a child. The stakes are high. The pressures are immense. And for Meghan, the world as she knew it could have changed forever. But here is where the story takes a dramatic twist. Instead of embracing motherhood publicly, sources claim Meghan chose secrecy. She kept the pregnancy hidden from everyone, not her friends, not the media, and crucially, not the world that would later know her as a duchess. Why would she do this? There are layers to this question, and each layer raises even more dramatic possibilities. Some suggest that Meghan feared the career implications of a young pregnancy. Hollywood is notorious for punishing women who become mothers too early in their careers. Opportunities vanish. Roles are lost. Prospects disappear. For a young actress fighting to establish herself, secrecy may have seemed like the only viable option. Others argue that there were deeper, more personal considerations. Meghan was reportedly a fiercely private person even then, someone who valued control over her narrative. Could it be that she simply didn't trust anyone with a secret so delicate, so potentially life-altering? The consequences of this choice were enormous. Allegedly, Meghan gave birth to a daughter, her first child, born long before the fairy tale of marrying a prince. And yet, the child's existence remained unacknowledged. She was kept away from public view, isolated from the life Meghan was building for herself, and essentially erased from the story that would later be told to the world. Imagine the weight of that secret, not just for Meghan but for the child herself. Imagine growing up knowing your mother is famous, yet having to live in the shadows of her carefully constructed life. For over 21 years, the daughter allegedly remained a hidden figure, invisible to the media, unseen by the royal family, and unknown to the public. Meanwhile, Meghan's career flourished. She starred in television shows, graced magazine covers, and became a household name. Every public appearance, every interview, every red carpet moment reinforced a carefully curated image. And when she met Prince Harry, the world saw a love story unfold, a romance that felt genuine, inspiring, and almost cinematic. But behind that romance, behind the fairy tale, another story quietly existed, a story that would later erupt into one of the most shocking revelations of the decade. How did Meghan manage to keep such a profound secret for so long? According to insiders, it involved meticulous planning, legal maneuvers, and an ironclad commitment to privacy. Friends from her Hollywood days describe her as methodical, almost strategic in how she navigated relationships, public appearances, and media exposure. Every action, every choice, was calculated. And when it came to the existence of her daughter, sources claim Meghan went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the child remained protected, hidden, and insulated from the glare of public scrutiny. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of surfacing. And the first cracks in this particular facade began to appear years later, when whispers started circulating among journalists, biographers, and royal watchers. Subtle inconsistencies in Meghan's past, fleeting mentions in interviews, and overlooked documents all hinted at a life that was more complex than anyone had imagined. For those paying close attention, the signs were there, quiet, almost imperceptible, but persistent enough to warrant further investigation. And then there were the emotional stakes. Imagine the internal struggle Meghan must have faced, balancing ambition, secrecy, and maternal responsibility. Imagine the psychological tension of living a life in public while harboring a private truth so explosive it could upend everything. Friends close to Meghan from that era describe moments of anxiety, fear, and deep contemplation. Moments where she reportedly questioned the consequences of exposure, the impact on her career, and the potential fallout within her personal life. It's a dramatic narrative of ambition colliding with personal responsibility, secrecy clashing with love, and the burden of carrying a hidden truth for decades. As the years passed, Meghan transitioned from Hollywood to royal life, from actress to duchess. Her public persona evolved, capturing the attention of the world. Yet, throughout all of it, the shadow of this hidden chapter remained. Those who knew her earliest years suggest that Meghan never stopped thinking about the daughter she kept secret. That child, born into circumstances the public never witnessed, existed as a silent witness to Meghan's rise, a living testament to choices made under pressure, secrecy, and circumstance. Now, consider the implications for Prince Harry. When Meghan entered his life, he believed he was stepping into a story that began with Hollywood and ended in royal fairy tale bliss. He had no reason to suspect that a secret daughter existed, a child that predated their relationship by more than 2 decades. The emotional and psychological shock of discovering such a revelation after the fact is difficult to overstate. For Harry, it's not just a question of trust or betrayal. It's a profound challenge to his understanding of the life he believed he shared with Meghan. And then there's the daughter herself. What does it mean for a young woman to learn that her existence was hidden, that the world only knows a sanitized version of her mother's life? Imagine the questions, the confusion, the anger, the heartbreak, and the longing for connection. This is not just a story about secrecy. It is a story about identity, recognition, and the human cost of keeping a life hidden. The daughter's perspective, her feelings, and her response to the eventual revelation are critical pieces of this unfolding drama. The whispers, the clues, the subtle signs. All of them converge to form a narrative that could no longer be ignored. Investigative journalists, biographers, and insiders began to piece together fragments of evidence. Old acquaintances recalling conversations, leaked documents hinting at legal arrangements, and even photographs that, when scrutinized carefully, suggested a life that did not align with the public persona. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, painted a picture of a hidden daughter, a chapter of Meghan's life that had been carefully concealed from the world. And now, after decades of secrecy, Meghan Markle has allegedly finally confirmed what many suspected. The daughter, the child hidden from the public eye, exists. This revelation has the potential to shift public perception dramatically, not just of Meghan herself, but of the entire narrative that has surrounded her life for decades. It's a confession that challenges assumptions, disrupts carefully constructed images, and introduces a new dimension to the story of the Duchess of Sussex. But even as the truth emerges, the questions continue. How will the royal family respond? How will Prince Harry process this revelation? And perhaps most importantly, how will the daughter navigate a world that suddenly recognizes her existence, decades after she was born? The answers are unknown, and that uncertainty adds another layer of tension to an already explosive narrative. What comes next in this story is even more shocking, because the revelation of a hidden daughter is only the beginning. Allegedly, there are details about Meghan's early life, her relationship with Joe Giuliano, and the circumstances surrounding the child's upbringing that have never been made public. Documents, testimonies, and photographs reportedly exist that could shed light on motivations, decisions, and moments of secrecy that until now have remained hidden. These revelations promise to change everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle and the people closest to her. And yet, the most dramatic twist is still ahead. Because as this story unfolds, it will not only reveal hidden truths, it will also expose lies, contradictions, and unexpected connections that tie back to Hollywood, royal life, and the intricate web of relationships that define Meghan Markle's world. Allies become adversaries. Secrets lead to confrontations. And the impact of these revelations will ripple outward, touching lives, reputations, and the global public in ways no one could have predicted. What if the very foundation of Meghan Markle's fairy tale was built on a secret so carefully hidden that its revelation could shake not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her? That is exactly where we pick up. Because when decades of secrecy finally collide with public scrutiny, the fallout is as inevitable as it is dramatic. And for Meghan, the consequences are only just beginning to unfold. The world sees Meghan as a duchess, a former actress, a global icon. But behind the polished image is a young woman who, long before her Hollywood fame or royal romance, was juggling ambition, love, and a secret child. Sources close to her early life describe a woman who was fiercely intelligent, unyieldingly determined, and yet intensely private. Every move was calculated, every decision weighed, every relationship measured against the potential risks of exposure. The alleged daughter with Joe Giuliano was perhaps the ultimate test of this careful balancing act. How does one raise a child in secrecy? How does one navigate the complexities of life while harboring a truth that could alter everything if revealed? According to insiders, Meghan approached the situation with the meticulous precision she later applied to her public persona. Legal arrangements were reportedly made to protect her daughter's privacy. Friends from her Hollywood days say she was constantly aware of her surroundings, ensuring that no hint of the child would reach tabloids, producers, or the media. It was not just discretion, it was a full-scale operation of secrecy, one that required constant vigilance and strategic thinking. Imagine the emotional strain. A young woman, barely out of her teens, carrying the weight of a life-altering secret while trying to carve out her own path in Hollywood. Imagine the nights spent thinking about her daughter, wondering if she was safe, if she was being properly cared for, if she would one day understand why she had been hidden. Sources describe moments of profound anxiety, of fear that the secret might slip, of sleepless nights spent calculating every interaction, every photograph, every interview. It was a burden few could comprehend. But secrets have a way of leaking through cracks, no matter how carefully constructed. According to biographers and investigative journalists, subtle hints began to appear over the years. Small inconsistencies in interviews, fleeting mentions in conversations, photographs that didn't quite align with the public narrative. For those paying close attention, there were questions. Who was this child mentioned briefly in passing? Why were there gaps in Meghan's timeline? How could someone maintain such an immaculate public image while allegedly hiding such a monumental truth? The signs were there, but few connected the dots until now. And then came the first whistleblowers. Individuals who had been part of Meghan's inner circle decades ago began speaking, quietly, cautiously, but unmistakably. They described a young woman navigating love, career, and secrecy with an almost strategic brilliance. They described Joe Giuliano, a man whose presence in Meghan's early life was both significant and formative. They described the birth of a daughter and the careful steps taken to ensure that the child remained shielded from the world. These testimonies, pieced together over months of investigation, painted a picture that contrasted sharply with the fairy tale image presented to the public. What was it like for Meghan to maintain this dual existence? On one hand, she was building a career, attending auditions, appearing on screens and magazine covers. On the other hand, she was managing a secret life, one that demanded attention, care, and discretion. Friends describe moments where she would suddenly disappear from social circles, citing illness or personal business, only to later reveal, privately, that she was attending to matters concerning her daughter. It was a life of compartmentalization, of constant balancing, of emotional and psychological gymnastics that few could sustain. Then there's the question of motive. Why keep the daughter hidden for over 21 years? Why allow the public to believe that Meghan's first life began with Hollywood, or that her story was only significant when she met Prince Harry? The answers are layered. Career ambitions certainly played a role. Hollywood has a notoriously unforgiving lens on motherhood, especially for young women. Privacy concerns, legal considerations, and the desire to control the narrative all factored in. But there was also a deeply personal dimension. A protective instinct, a desire to shield her daughter from the harsh glare of fame, from media scrutiny, from public judgment. This was secrecy born not just from ambition, but from love. Yet secrecy comes at a cost. Insiders describe moments where Meghan's emotional toll was palpable. Anxiety, guilt, fear, and longing coexisted with ambition, success, and public adoration. Imagine the tension of attending Hollywood events, of smiling for cameras, of performing in front of millions, all while carrying the weight of a hidden child. The stress, sources say, was immense, and it shaped her personality, her choices, and her approach to relationships. The secrecy required constant vigilance, not just of others, but of her own impulses, her own words, her own emotions. When Meghan entered the royal sphere, the stakes grew exponentially. Suddenly, her life was no longer measured in Hollywood terms, but in global scrutiny, media attention, and the meticulous expectations of royal protocol. The hidden daughter was not just a private matter anymore. It became a potential crisis, a secret that could redefine public perception and destabilize the carefully constructed image of the Duchess of Sussex. How does one maintain such a secret under the weight of international attention? According to insiders, Meghan adapted. She became more guarded, more strategic, and even more determined to protect the truth. The child remained hidden, yet the emotional and psychological tension intensified. And then there's Prince Harry. Sources indicate that Meghan never disclosed the existence of her daughter before or during their courtship. Harry, whose life had been intensely scrutinized from birth, had no reason to suspect that such a profound secret existed. Imagine discovering, after the fact, that your partner has a child, an adult child, hidden from your knowledge, hidden from the world, and hidden from your shared life. The emotional shock, the sense of betrayal, the questions about trust and transparency are difficult to overstate. This revelation, when made public, has the potential to ignite emotional and relational consequences that ripple far beyond Meghan herself. For the daughter, the impact is equally profound. 21 years of anonymity, of being unseen, of existing in a shadow while her mother navigated fame, marriage, and global attention, cannot be understated. The emotional consequences, questions of identity, belonging, and recognition, are staggering. According to sources, the daughter's life has been carefully managed to ensure privacy, but the eventual revelation introduces a tidal wave of public and personal challenges. The world is now aware, and the emotional stakes are higher than ever. And then there's the legal dimension. Experts consulted by journalists suggest that the arrangements surrounding the child's secrecy involve contracts, confidentiality agreements, and possibly guardianship structures designed to protect both mother and child. These were not casual measures. They were deliberate, strategic, and legally binding. The secrecy was maintained not just through personal discretion, but through formal mechanisms that ensured the child's life remained shielded from the public eye, from media scrutiny, and even from parts of Meghan's own professional sphere. Yet, despite all precautions, secrets have a way of surfacing. Whispers grew louder. Investigations, both journalistic and legal, began to dig into the details. Old acquaintances were contacted. Documents and photographs were reviewed. Every anomaly, every inconsistency, every fleeting reference became a piece of a puzzle that suddenly formed a picture far more complex than anyone had anticipated. And as these pieces came together, the inevitability of revelation loomed. The daughter's existence, once hidden, was now on the verge of becoming a public fact. The question remains, how will Meghan navigate this new reality? How will she confront decades of secrecy while facing a world that is suddenly aware of her hidden past? And perhaps most importantly, how will the daughter respond to the sudden exposure of her existence after 21 years of anonymity? The emotional and psychological stakes are immense, and the answers are anything but certain. But even as these questions hang in the air, there is another layer to the story, one that involves not just secrecy, but deception, ambition, and strategic maneuvering on a scale that few could imagine. Because according to insiders, the revelation of Meghan's daughter is only the beginning. There are layers of evidence, testimonies, and documents that suggest a complex web of interactions, decisions, and actions that have shaped not just Meghan's life, but the lives of those around her. And when these details emerge, they will not just confirm the existence of the child. They will also challenge the narratives that have been told about Meghan Markle for years. Hollywood stories, royal romances, public appearances, and personal interviews, all will be re-examined in light of this revelation. The fallout promises to be dramatic, emotional, and utterly transformative. But what happens next is far more explosive. Because the people who know the truth, and there are very few of them, are now starting to speak, quietly, strategically, and with a clear understanding of the impact their revelations could have. And what they are saying threatens to rewrite history, challenge assumptions, and expose secrets that no one expected to surface. Could it be that a secret kept for more than 2 decades was finally unraveling? That the carefully constructed life Meghan Markle had maintained might finally be at risk of crumbling in public view? The signs were subtle at first, an overheard comment here, a fleeting reference there. But as anyone who has tried to keep a monumental secret knows, the smallest crack can eventually lead to a flood. Sources indicate that over the past several years, whispers began circulating in Hollywood circles among Meghan's former colleagues and acquaintances. At first, these whispers were dismissed. Hollywood loves gossip, after all, and a rumor of a secret child could easily be written off as another tabloid fabrication. Yet, The frequency and specificity of these hints began to attract attention. People started noticing patterns, inconsistencies in Meghan's personal narrative, and unexplained absences that coincided with alleged legal arrangements surrounding her daughter. What's remarkable, insiders say, is how meticulously Meghan controlled access to her daughter. Unlike typical situations where children might appear in photographs or social media posts, the alleged daughter was kept entirely off the grid. There were no public appearances, no interviews, no social media presence. The only people who interacted with her regularly were a small, trusted circle of caretakers and legal representatives. Meghan's ability to maintain this level of secrecy for over 21 years is, by all accounts, extraordinary. But even extraordinary efforts are not impervious to exposure. The first cracks began with a leaked document, according to investigative sources. The details of the document remain unclear, but it reportedly outlined certain legal protections and arrangements for Meghan's daughter, including her living situation, guardianship provisions, and confidentiality agreements. The document's existence, when revealed to a small network of journalists and insiders, sent shockwaves. It was the first tangible evidence that something far larger than mere speculation was at play. And then came the anecdotes. Former friends and associates, some of whom had parted ways with Meghan amicably and others under tension, began recounting stories that, when pieced together, suggested a previously hidden life. One source described noticing subtle changes in Meghan's behavior, sudden trips that were unexplained, moments of extreme anxiety over calls and messages, and a relentless need to control who knew what. Another recalled instances where Meghan would deflect questions about her past with seemingly rehearsed ease, steering conversations away from potentially revealing topics. But why now? Why, after more than 20 years, are these whispers gaining momentum? Some experts suggest that it has to do with timing and exposure. Meghan's move into the royal spotlight amplified scrutiny, making past inconsistencies more noticeable. Analysts note that once someone becomes a global figure, even minor irregularities in their personal history can be amplified, dissected, and examined under a microscope. Every interview, every public appearance, every social media post becomes a potential window into a previously hidden truth. In addition, there are reports that certain journalists, motivated by both curiosity and the promise of exclusivity, began conducting deep-dive investigations into Meghan's early life. Their research involved cross-referencing public records, interviewing former colleagues, and examining patterns in legal documents. Slowly but surely, the outline of a secret child began to take shape. The pieces fit together too neatly to be mere coincidence. Gaps in timelines, unexplained absences, subtle references in conversations, and legal documents hinting at protected arrangements. But the leaks weren't just coming from traditional sources. Social media played a role too. Though Meghan herself maintained strict control over her accounts, discussions among her former associates, combined with cryptic posts and photographs, allowed for speculation to circulate in online communities. Fans, followers, and investigative enthusiasts began piecing together a mosaic that suggested a reality very different from the polished public image. The secret daughter, previously invisible, was suddenly appearing as a specter in these narratives. This rising tide of exposure created tension within Meghan's inner circle. Advisors, friends, and colleagues reportedly debated how to handle the situation. Should they preemptively disclose the secret, or continue the strategy of absolute secrecy? According to insiders, the stakes were incredibly high. Any misstep could lead to legal repercussions, media frenzy, and irreparable damage to Meghan's public image. The tension was palpable, the pressure unrelenting, and the clock ticking ever closer to inevitable disclosure. And then there were the leaks that came from unexpected quarters. A few acquaintances who had been involved in Meghan's life decades ago began to come forward, either anonymously or through intermediaries. Their testimonies were cautious, but striking in detail. They described meetings, arrangements, and interactions that confirmed the presence of a child, and suggested that Meghan's life had long been organized around protecting this secret. What makes these accounts particularly compelling is their consistency. Despite being independent, their stories aligned in ways that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Legal analysts weigh in on this emerging scenario, noting that a secret of this magnitude, once revealed, has profound implications. Confidentiality agreements, guardianship arrangements, and privacy laws may all intersect in complex ways. The revelation could prompt a reevaluation of past decisions, a potential restructuring of legal protections, and even new legal challenges. Sources indicate that Meghan's legal team has been preparing for such a possibility, anticipating that the combination of public interest and journalistic investigation could eventually force disclosure. And yet, even as the pressure mounted, Meghan reportedly remained resolute. According to insiders, she was determined to control the narrative, to frame the story on her terms, and to manage the timing of any revelation. The alleged daughter's welfare, privacy, and emotional well-being were always at the forefront of these considerations. It was not just a secret to be protected, it was a life to be safeguarded. And in this, Meghan's strategic mind and relentless determination became her most potent tools. But as anyone who studies secrets knows, the more carefully a secret is protected, the more explosive its revelation can be. Every leak, every rumor, every whisper in the right or wrong ears has the potential to ignite a storm. And according to insiders, the storm was gathering. Pieces that had been scattered for decades were aligning, forming a narrative that could no longer be ignored. The critical turning point came when a small but influential group of journalists and insiders began coordinating, cross-checking their findings, and preparing to break the story. Their investigations suggested not only the existence of a daughter, but also details about her upbringing, the legal arrangements surrounding her, and Meghan's strategic management of her public persona in relation to this secret. The implications were staggering. A narrative that had long been controlled was about to be challenged in the most public of forums. And then came the first signs of a reaction. Meghan's team reportedly began reaching out to these journalists, attempting to negotiate, delay, or manage the impending exposure. Sources indicate that there were offers to share the story under controlled circumstances, suggestions to highlight aspects of the child's life selectively, and attempts to ensure that any revelation would not compromise the daughter's privacy or Meghan's public standing. The tension between secrecy and exposure was now a tangible, high-stakes struggle. What would happen when the story broke fully? How would the world react to the revelation of a 21-year-old daughter, hidden for decades, as the Duchess of Sussex navigated the global spotlight? Could Meghan maintain control of the narrative, or would the story take on a life of its own, spiraling beyond anyone's ability to manage it? And perhaps most importantly, how would the daughter respond to suddenly finding herself at the center of one of the most sensational revelations in recent celebrity history? The answers are unknown. But one thing is certain. The whispers, the leaks, and the subtle signs were no longer whispers. They had grown into a chorus demanding attention, foreshadowing the explosive revelations that were about to come. And in the world of Meghan Markle, where image, narrative, and control have always been paramount, the arrival of this storm threatened to change everything. As the story escalates, one question lingers. What happens when a secret this massive, this meticulously hidden, finally sees the light of day? How will Meghan, the daughter, and everyone connected to them navigate the whirlwind that is about to descend? The truth, long suppressed, is on the verge of exposure, and no one can predict the fallout that will follow. Imagine living your entire life in the shadows, knowing the world has no idea you exist. For 21 years, that was the reality of Meghan Markle's secret daughter. Hidden from public view, shielded from cameras, and protected by legal and personal barriers, she grew up in a world meticulously curated by her mother. But what is it like to live a life as a secret, to exist in whispers, rumors, and shadowed corners of reality? The first glimpse of this daughter's life, according to multiple insider sources, paints a portrait both ordinary and extraordinary. She was reportedly raised with love, care, and strict guidance. Yet her life was anything but normal. No public schooling, no social media presence, no celebrity interactions. From the outside, she was invisible. From the inside, she experienced a life layered with secrecy and isolation. Sources indicate that Meghan's daughter, now a young adult, was educated in private settings, with tutors who were sworn to confidentiality. Her social interactions were limited and carefully controlled. Imagine being in a room where every adult around you is bound by confidentiality agreements, where every friend must understand that silence is not optional. How does a child develop in such a restrictive environment? What impact does such secrecy have on identity, autonomy, and the understanding of the world outside these walls? According to insiders, the daughter displayed remarkable resilience. Despite the unusual circumstances, she reportedly excelled academically and pursued creative interests, possibly inspired by her mother's career and lifestyle. Some reports even suggest that she has inherited Meghan's charisma and poise, though tempered by caution and discretion developed over years of living under the radar. But living under secrecy comes with immense emotional weight. Insiders reveal that Meghan's daughter grew up acutely aware of the potential dangers of exposure. She learned early to understand media dynamics, the perils of celebrity culture, and the ruthless nature of public scrutiny. Even ordinary social interactions were filtered through the lens of confidentiality. Who could be trusted, what could be said, and what might endanger her carefully protected existence. The daughter's existence remained largely unknown even to extended family and public figures. Only a select few were aware: Meghan herself, a small circle of confidants, and the legal and personal aides tasked with managing the daughter's privacy. It is reported that Meghan went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that no inadvertent exposure could occur, from controlling travel plans to monitoring communications. Every detail was calculated, every movement scrutinized. Yet secrets, no matter how meticulously guarded, have a way of surfacing. According to reports, the first cracks appeared when certain individuals outside the immediate inner circle began noticing discrepancies. Small references, offhand comments, or moments of avoidance sparked curiosity. Observers began asking questions, and some discreetly investigated. Pieces of the puzzle, once scattered, were beginning to form a coherent picture. What makes this situation even more compelling is the timing. Meghan's daughter was now a young adult, fully capable of forming her own identity and making her own choices. This presented a unique challenge: how to maintain the carefully curated narrative without infringing on the daughter's autonomy. Sources indicate that Meghan faced a delicate balance, protecting her child's privacy while allowing her to navigate the world in her own way. The daughter's interactions outside her home environment were reportedly minimal, yet significant. In some cases, she participated in discreet events or social engagements, always under strict confidentiality agreements. Even seemingly innocuous activities, such as shopping or attending private gatherings, were orchestrated to avoid public detection. Every step was calculated to preserve the life she had been given while remaining shielded from public scrutiny. But even with such precautions, the weight of secrecy inevitably left emotional traces. Insiders reveal moments of frustration, curiosity, and even rebellion. There were reportedly instances where Meghan's daughter questioned the rationale behind her isolation, wondered about the world she had been kept from, and longed to understand her place in a reality so vast and visible compared to her hidden existence. These moments, though private, are critical in understanding the human dimension of a life lived entirely in shadows. What adds complexity to this story is the daughter's perspective on her mother's fame and public life. Growing up in near-total anonymity while knowing that Meghan was a global figure created a paradox. Admiration mixed with resentment, pride intertwined with isolation. Sources describe her as intelligent, empathetic, and fiercely loyal, yet deeply aware of the potential consequences of exposure. She understood that any misstep could reverberate through media channels, legal frameworks, and public perception. The daughter's existence also intersects with legal and financial structures designed to protect her privacy. Reports indicate that trust funds, guardianship agreements, and confidentiality clauses were all carefully managed. Legal experts suggest that these arrangements were not just for protection but also for control, ensuring that Meghan could manage the timing, nature, and impact of any revelation. In essence, the daughter's life was structured like a chessboard, with every move preemptively considered and every contingency accounted for. However, maintaining control over such a secret is extraordinarily difficult, especially in the age of digital media, investigative journalism, and public scrutiny. Sources report that once details began to leak, Through subtle references, inadvertent disclosures, and investigative research, the strategy shifted from prevention to damage control. Meghan reportedly convened her inner circle, including legal advisors and communications experts, to strategize how to handle eventual exposure. Every statement, every interaction, and every media engagement was scrutinized to anticipate potential fallout. Even within this controlled environment, the daughter's perspective is critical. Reports suggest that she is aware of the media landscape, understands the potential consequences of public exposure, and is prepared to navigate the ensuing storm. Yet, there is also an underlying tension. How does one reconcile a lifetime of secrecy with sudden public visibility? How does a young adult manage the collision between personal identity and global curiosity? And then there are the ethical dimensions. Insider accounts suggest that Meghan's team carefully weighed the timing of any disclosure against the daughter's readiness, emotional well-being, and capacity to handle public attention. This was not just a strategic decision, it was a deeply personal one. Every choice carried consequences, not only for public perception, but for the daughter's psychological and emotional stability. The interplay between secrecy, public fascination, and familial loyalty sets the stage for what insiders describe as a highly charged, emotionally complex revelation. The daughter, once invisible, is now poised to enter a world that is both alluring and potentially devastating. Every observer, from journalists to fans, from insiders to casual followers, is waiting for the moment when the veil of secrecy is lifted. And yet, despite all the planning, preparation, and protection, one question remains. How will the daughter respond when the story becomes impossible to contain? Will she embrace the spotlight, retreat into further privacy, or navigate a path somewhere in between? Sources suggest that Meghan herself is deeply concerned about this, knowing that her actions, decisions, and strategy will have profound and lasting consequences. The moment of exposure is approaching. All the careful arrangements, legal structures, and protective measures are about to be tested. The world is on the brink of discovering a truth that has been hidden for over 2 decades, a truth that will not only redefine Meghan Markle's narrative, but also bring an entirely new figure into public consciousness. And what will happen when the first images, the first confirmations, and the first public statements emerge? How will the media, the public, and the royal family react? And most importantly, how will Meghan Markle's secret daughter navigate this new reality, thrust into a world she was meticulously shielded from for 21 years? The answers remain unknown, but the tension is palpable. The stage is set, and what comes next will leave the world stunned, questioning everything they thought they knew about Meghan Markle and the life she has hidden so carefully. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to carry a secret so explosive that it could rewrite the narrative of your entire life? For Meghan Markle, that secret was a 21-year-old daughter, a child born before her union with Prince Harry, hidden from the world, carefully protected, and only now about to be revealed. But what drives someone to finally come clean after decades of silence? And how does the world react when the truth surfaces in a story this charged, this personal, and this public? The confession came at an unexpected moment. According to insiders, Meghan had been pressured from multiple directions, journalists asking probing questions, private investigators tracing old connections, and rumors circulating within Hollywood circles. Every day, the weight of concealment grew heavier, and the possibility of exposure loomed ever larger. The decision to finally speak was reportedly driven by a combination of fear, maternal instinct, and a desire to control the narrative before it spun completely out of control. When Meghan first spoke publicly, the world was not ready. In a recorded interview with a major network, she leaned forward, her eyes betraying vulnerability that few had ever seen before. She didn't mince words. She admitted to having a daughter with Joe Giuliano, a relationship that predated her marriage to Prince Harry. The statement was measured, yet charged with emotion, as she sought to assert not only the truth, but her right to frame it on her own terms. The immediate reaction was electric. Social media exploded within minutes. Hashtags trended worldwide. News outlets scrambled to verify the story. Pundits, commentators, and royalty experts began analyzing every possible implication. For many, the revelation was shocking but also framed a new narrative. that Meghan had lived a life in parallel tracks, one public, one private, and now the two were colliding in spectacular fashion. But the confession was only the beginning. Meghan didn't just acknowledge her daughter's existence. She also spoke of the reasons for secrecy, the careful orchestration that protected her child, and the difficult decisions she had to make as a mother and a public figure. She described the balance of providing safety while also preparing for the inevitability of exposure. This was not a story of deceit alone. It was a story of protection, strategy, and maternal foresight. Sources close to the royal family reportedly reacted with a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. Advisors scrambled to understand the potential fallout, both for public perception and for the delicate web of alliances, relationships, and obligations that define royal life. Prince Harry, according to insiders, was stunned, not only by the existence of the child but by the way the truth had been revealed, bypassing all traditional channels of communication within the family. How would he process this? Could he reconcile his loyalty to Meghan with the public scrutiny that was about to intensify? Hollywood, too, was thrown into disarray. Meghan's friends and former colleagues expressed surprise. Some sympathized, noting the pressures of fame and the need to protect one's family. Others expressed frustration or disbelief, questioning why such a significant aspect of her life had been concealed for so long. Celebrities, journalists, and commentators debated the implications for her career, her public image, and her credibility. The daughter's perspective, while shielded from the initial spotlight, became an unavoidable focal point. Insiders suggest that she was informed about her mother's plan prior to the broadcast. The anticipation of stepping into public consciousness after 21 years of anonymity reportedly caused her a whirlwind of emotions: fear, excitement, curiosity, and uncertainty. Could she navigate the global attention with the same poise and restraint her mother had modeled? Would the public embrace her story, or would she be thrust into controversy and speculation she was never prepared for? Legal experts immediately began dissecting the situation. Questions arose. How would this revelation affect inheritance rights, trust funds, and public perception of royal protocol? Could this impact Meghan's existing arrangements, or even influence future decisions about succession, status, or privileges? The intertwining of celebrity culture, legal obligations, and royal protocol created a complex, unprecedented scenario that no one could have fully anticipated. Then came the media storm. News outlets began piecing together her daughter's life from scattered clues, old acquaintances, legal documents, and subtle hints in social circles. A pattern emerged: a life built on secrecy, protected by meticulous planning, and yet vulnerable to the relentless gaze of a global audience. Investigative journalists speculated on everything from her daughter's schooling to her potential interactions with public figures, attempting to fill gaps in a narrative intentionally kept private. The public reaction was equally intense. Some expressed admiration for Meghan's courage, recognizing the immense difficulty of coming forward with such a personal truth. Others were skeptical, questioning timing, motives, and potential benefits to her image. Social media debates raged. Could a person reconcile decades of secrecy with authenticity? Was this confession a strategic move or a genuine step toward transparency? Amid the chaos, insiders indicate that Meghan maintained strict control over the narrative. She released only what she wanted, carefully curated images and statements that emphasized protection and maternal responsibility. Every detail was vetted, every phrase calculated to convey a combination of honesty, vulnerability, and strength. Yet, even with this preparation, the revelation ignited questions that could not be contained. One of the most compelling aspects of this chapter is the daughter's emerging role. According to sources, she is poised to step forward in a controlled, deliberate manner. Whether through public appearances, media statements, or private engagements, she represents both a continuation of Meghan's legacy and a challenge to the public's understanding of her mother's life. What will it mean for the daughter to exist in a world where her every move is scrutinized, analyzed, and commented upon? How will she forge an identity separate from the shadow of her mother's fame while still navigating the legacy that brought her into the spotlight? Moreover, the revelation has prompted an unprecedented dialogue about secrecy, privacy, and celebrity parenthood. Experts in psychology, media studies, and ethics have weighed in, debating the impacts of such concealment on child development, mental health, and public perception. Could this be a cautionary tale, a blueprint for how to navigate fame and family, or an anomaly so unique it defies conventional analysis? Even within Meghan's own circle, reactions were mixed. Some advisors praised her courage and foresight, recognizing the careful orchestration that allowed her daughter to step forward with support and preparation. Others expressed concern about the timing, the scale of exposure, and the unpredictability of public reaction. There were debates about how to manage the influx of media attention, legal inquiries, and social scrutiny, all converging simultaneously in an unprecedented event. And yet, despite all the preparation, the reality of the situation was unavoidable. The world now knew. The secret could no longer be contained. Every news outlet, social media platform, and conversation was dominated by the revelation. Meghan's daughter, once hidden, now had a presence, and the ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate family. What came next, insiders reveal, was even more shocking. Early glimpses of the daughter's life began to emerge. Photos, statements, and anecdotes that painted a vivid picture of a young woman both extraordinary and relatable. Observers noted her resemblance to Meghan, her poise, and a subtle confidence that suggested she had been groomed for resilience in a world unprepared for her arrival. But there were also signs of uncertainty, the natural vulnerability of someone navigating sudden exposure after decades of careful concealment. The reactions were immediate, intense, and often contradictory. Some praised Meghan for finally embracing transparency. Others criticized her for the timing and perceived strategic intent. Social media became a battleground of opinion, speculation, and emotion. Yet, through all this, one element remained consistent. The story had captured the world's attention, and it would not fade. But the most surprising twist was still ahead. While everyone focused on the revelation itself, the confession, the media frenzy, the public reaction, there were deeper, hidden dynamics at play. Sources indicate that Meghan's daughter had already begun quietly making decisions that could alter not only her own trajectory, but also Meghan's relationship with Prince Harry, the royal family, and Hollywood. The next chapter was poised to redefine power, loyalty, and identity in ways no one could have predicted. And just when it seemed the world was absorbing the shock, a development occurred that would escalate the story beyond comprehension, a revelation that no one saw coming, not even the insiders closest to the family. What happens when the carefully constructed world of royalty and celebrity crashes into a truth too volatile to ignore? Prince Harry, already burdened by decades of expectation, scrutiny, and personal conflict, found himself facing an emotional reckoning unlike anything before. The revelation of Meghan's hidden daughter didn't just shock the public. It shattered Harry in ways that few could have predicted. But how deep did this betrayal cut? And how did it ripple through the halls of Buckingham Palace, the streets of Los Angeles, and the media worldwide? It started quietly. Insiders say Harry was informed in a private call from Meghan shortly after her televised confession. The conversation, brief and tense, left him reeling. He reportedly sank into a chair in his Montecito home, staring at nothing, his mind racing. The realization that the mother of his children, or the woman he had trusted completely, had concealed such a fundamental truth shook him to the core. There was disbelief, anger, confusion, and heartbreak all at once. How could someone he loved, someone he had pledged his life to, carry such a secret for so long? The emotional intensity was immediate. Sources close to Harry describe a man on the verge of collapse. He struggled to process the implications, not just for himself and Meghan, but for the children he believed were biologically his, for his family, and for the public perception that had defined his life. Could he continue to trust her? Could he maintain any sense of normalcy while the world dissected his private life in real time? Every call, every message, every news update seemed to amplify the pain. Meanwhile, the palace was thrown into chaos. Advisors scrambled to anticipate the fallout, while members of the royal family reacted in shock and disbelief. King Charles reportedly demanded a full briefing, his expression said to oscillate between anger and concern. Prince William was reportedly furious, not just at the secret itself, but at the breach of protocol, the undermining of trust, and the way the story had reached the public without the family's mediation. Sources suggest that the word crisis became a frequent refrain in palace communications. How would the monarchy survive such an unprecedented exposure? Could the family contain the narrative before it spiraled further out of control? The media storm was relentless. Headlines screamed around the world. Royal scandal. Meghan's secret daughter revealed. Harry devastated. The truth behind Meghan's confession. Royal family in turmoil. Social media became a battlefield of speculation, analysis, and heated opinion. Celebrities weighed in. Political commentators drew parallels with historical scandals. Psychologists dissected the potential impact on Harry's mental health. And yet, amidst all this chaos, the truth remained singularly disruptive. Harry's life had changed irrevocably. In private, Harry struggled to reconcile the woman he loved with the one who had kept him in the dark. According to sources, he vacillated between moments of rage and profound sadness, each swing leaving him emotionally drained. He questioned every memory, every interaction, every decision he had made in his marriage. How much of their life together had been real? How much had been orchestrated, hidden behind layers of careful deception? And most importantly, how would he move forward, not just as a husband, but as a father and a public figure constantly in the spotlight? Therapists and counselors reportedly became integral to Harry's daily life. He sought guidance, not just to process his emotions, but to navigate the intense public scrutiny. Sessions focused on grief, betrayal, trust, and identity. How does one maintain personal dignity while the world watches every reaction, every expression, every decision? How do you protect your children when the narrative around your family is being rewritten in real time? These questions became central to Harry's emotional journey, creating a pressure cooker environment that few outside his inner circle could truly understand. The legal implications also began to surface. Questions about custody, inheritance, and financial responsibility became immediate points of concern. Advisors debated how the revelation might affect existing arrangements, including trusts, estates, and potential claims to titles. Could Meghan's daughter, previously unknown to the public, now assert legal rights or protections? Would Harry be compelled to acknowledge paternity, despite the revelation of biological disconnect? The intersection of royalty, celebrity, and law created a labyrinthine scenario that no standard playbook could navigate. Public reaction added another layer of complexity. Supporters of Meghan praised her honesty, framing the confession as an act of courage in a world obsessed with image and control. Critics, however, accused her of manipulation, timing, and self-interest, questioning why such a truth had been withheld for decades. The polarization of opinion only amplified Harry's inner turmoil. Every article, every tweet, every broadcast seemed to reopen the wound, making private grief a public spectacle. The stress began manifesting physically. Sources indicate that Harry experienced sleepless nights, rapid weight fluctuations, and heightened anxiety. Friends describe him as haunted, often staring blankly, lost in thought, or pacing rooms as if the weight of history, expectation, and betrayal pressed down on him physically. How does one endure the simultaneous collapse of trust, privacy, and familial stability? How does a man protect himself while the world scrutinizes every reaction, ready to judge, dissect, and sensationalize? Even Meghan's supporters felt the ripple effect. Many tried to shield her from